Hey, good morning. My name is Tony Saldanha, and I was really looking forward to being with you in person in South Africa. But hey, you know what? These are very unusual times. Not that you need to be reminded of what's happening here, but who would have known 6 months ago that working remotely would be such a big thing, and of course that there would be such a big difference between what you really do when you remote work and what your family thinks you do, what your coworkers think you do, and of course, what you actually do. So these are, yes, very different times, but I'm here not to talk about different times, but I'm here to tell you why the best is still ahead of you. Why I think Africa and technology, if they can kind of come together with the right discipline, this might be the absolute best times ahead, not just for you as a continent or you for a company, but you as individuals. And in order to do that, I want to kind of share with you a few anecdotes. I want to reinforce that every crisis is still an opportunity. And this crisis may actually be a bigger opportunity than you think. Among the many things that I do, I like to study economic crises. And so I've had the opportunity to study the 2008 global economic crisis, the ASEAN crisis in the late 90s, economic crisis in China in the 90s, early 90s, and of course the Soviet Union collapse and the crisis. And what I noticed across that was a 4-stage recovery. There is always the scramble, and the equivalent of this during the pandemic was when companies were starting to figure out, hey, how do I keep my businesses going and remote work, as I was saying. Of course, then you kind of get to the sustained stage where that becomes normal. And here's the point. This is where you are. This is where we are. You still have 2 stages ahead of you. And in those 2 stages lie the opportunity. There is going to be a stage where we all have to pay the piper. I mean, there's been a lot of money poured in by companies and economies into the crisis. That means that they're going to be looking for productivity, and that work is still ahead of us. And then the 4th stage is, of course, where that becomes the going normal. But there's one other lesson from economic crises that I want to share with you, which is there was a study done of the 2008 global economic crisis between companies that essentially ended up being big winners from there and others that weren't winners. Let me put it that way. And the interesting thing that they found was the companies that eventually won in the longer term, 10-year period after the crisis, started to actually pull away from their competition during the economic crisis. So the gray bar that you see on the chart here is the period of the crisis. And what you actually see is that those companies that won started to grow profitability, not just protect it. And obviously, the best tool that we all have to do that is digital capabilities. And so then the question becomes, okay, fine, how? We all know digital transformation is a big deal. We also know that, unfortunately, 70% of all digital transformations fail, which is really where some of the work that I've done comes in. And that work is, of course, reflected in my book, Why Digital Transformations Fail. But to summarize this, what I have provided is a 5-stage model that helps people with 2 things. One is get past the buzzwords and the language, which actually gets in the way of successful digital transformation. And then the second is to identify checklist-type methodologies that were influenced by the work done in the airline industry checklist to improve aviation operational rates, and of course reapplied very successfully in the medical industry. Now is the time to kind of use some of those same techniques in the digital transformation industry. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about. And I want to put this in the crisis context, because there is no better time for each one of you than now to essentially do this work, right? And so in order to do that, I'm going to, as I said, be sharing a whole lot of stories. But before I start, let me do a little bit of introduction about myself. I've had the absolute immense pleasure of being associated with the IT and global business services or shared services industry for about 35 years now. I had a great 27-year career with Procter & Gamble. I almost grew up, if you will, with the IT and global business services industry. I helped set up the first ever shared services center in the Philippines in 1993. And then, of course, I was associated with this whole IT outsourcing or global business services outsourcing wave in 2003 when I led the largest ever global outsourcing deal, which was a 10-year, $8 billion deal for Procter & Gamble with Hewlett-Packard. And then I ran operations, IT and global business services for Procter & Gamble in every region of the world. That's a fairly substantial operation. It's about $2.5 billion. And then, of course, more recently, I had the opportunity to consult with maybe about 20 of the Fortune 100 companies, and of course, the book on digital transformation that I mentioned, and all of that has given me a great perspective, not just as a practitioner, but now as somebody that can look across the world, and of course focus on what board of directors and senior leaders are seeing. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of sense of what they are experiencing and what they are seeing, they of course know that the digital disruption era is upon us. They know that most jobs in the manufacturing and retail and most of the sectors are essentially going to be done by robots in a very short period of time, maybe in the next 10 years or so. They of course know that the future of work is very different. It may be closer to the gig economy, which is already here. 40% of the workforce in the US already participates in some ways in that. They know that digital technology is kind of pervading every nook and cranny of the industry. I mean, you might be reading the short one paragraph or one sentence updates on sports and financials in Yahoo Finance, but you may not be aware that 90% of them are already generated by software robots. Who would have thought that journalism would be one of the industries that would be impacted? Now, one of the things that that many of these senior leaders don't know is the effect of Moore's Law, which is that today there is the capability to go out and buy for $1,000 some pretty amazing IT capability. Now, very shortly though, in the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to be able to actually go out and buy for $1,000 the entire computing capacity of a human brain. Now, I want you to think about it. The human brain is incredible. It's a marvel of nature. And to even think that for $1,000 you could get that, that's pretty remarkable. But of course, this is Moore's Law, and it doesn't end there, because in about 27 years from 2023, you're going to be able to go out and buy for the same $1,000 the computing capacity of all humans on Earth. One of the questions I get asked when I do a lot of work with the boards is, hey, Tony, if we have to make choices between hiring people and buying $1,000 computers in the future, how do we deal with that? And that's really part of what we're going to be talking about. And of course, this is not just transactional work, because even work that we thought was very intelligent human being, emotional work, such as lip reading, can now be done more accurately, including nuances on facial features and emotions that can be read by computers more accurately than human brains. And then there's one other study that is absolutely mind-boggling that I thought I'd share with you. Of course, you all know about your countryman, Elon Musk, and some of the work that he's doing with neural computing and connecting it with human brains. But there has been an experiment that was done in China where they took a rat and then they embedded a chip in the rat's brains. And then they taught the rat certain skills, how to get to food, navigating a maze, a whole bunch of things. But then they took another rat and they put it in a very different geography, and they put the same chip in the second rat's brain. And they connected the two chips over the internet. And you know what happened? All of the tricks that the first rat had learned over a period of several months got instantaneously transmitted to the second rat's brain. Think about how crazy this is. But this is the reason why senior executives and boards are struggling with, what do we do? What do we do with business models, if this is the kind of disruption that we face? And my answer to them and to you is, first and foremost, context. You know that we are, of course, in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. But what's different about the fourth industrial revolution, unlike the first three that were about steam and electricity and, of course, the internet, is that this technology, digital technology, is eating all the other technologies. It is disrupting mechanical technology. Think about the Internet of Things. It is disrupting social technology. Think about Facebook. It is disrupting medical technology, the rat brain experiment examples that I just shared with you. And this requires a very different context and a very different approach to anything that mankind and companies and governments has taken from the previous industrial revolutions. What it requires us to do is to educate ourselves on context and educate ourselves on things such as digital transformation, which is our best weapon to survive and thrive in this digital transformation. In my mind, the confusion around the term digital transformation is understandable, but we have to get out of that as quickly as possible, because today you talk to 100 people on what do you mean by digital transformation, and you get 100 different answers. I actually did this study about 5 years ago, when I talked to 100 different executives and venture capitalists and startups. And I got a wide range of answers, everything from, oh, it's all hype. We used to have digital watches in the 1970s. This is just, advanced capabilities, all the way through, oh, no. It is these artificial intelligence and robots that are coming from us. All of that is understandable, but there's only one right answer to this, which is digital transformation is the rewiring of successful companies, people, and society from the third industrial revolution, which is kind of where we're at, into the fourth. In other words, how do you change yourself, not just using one technology or one capability or a tool or a software, but how do you completely rewire yourself to be successful in a new era? And so with that in mind, the question becomes, okay, but what is the right time to act, and how do you act? And this was a struggle that I was confronted with, again, about 5 years ago, because Procter & Gamble's very successful IT and global business services was considered to be best in class. But anytime somebody says that, I get nervous, because it means that you're at the risk of obsolescence if you don't do anything, right? And so that's when I actually set out to talk to those 100 entities that I was talking about. And among those was the founder of a small little startup, Wanelo. And I was trying to get in touch with this a person, AJ Brustein, and over email we were kind of going back and forth around, when are you available? And you might be able to read on the screen there. I said, I'm not available, next week. And he said, fine, I will have Amy, who I assumed was his admin, to go ahead and schedule something. And then Amy responded. And I know this sounds like a pretty regular story, until you kind of double click on bottom left Amy's signature. And what you find is that Amy is a robot. Now I want you to kind of read Amy's email if you can. Nothing in the message that was crafted gives you an indication that this was done by a robot. It is completely in context, because when I say I'm not available, on April 10th, I'm not available next week, none of the options that were offered were in that next week. And then ask yourself the question, which is one of the more human-oriented jobs in a company? And I'm sure the admin assistant to the CEO has got to be one of those. Now, again, look at that date. This is 2015. That taught me a very important lesson. All of us that ask questions like, is technology ready? We are part of the problem, because it's not technology's job to be ready for us. It is our job to understand not entire technologies, but very narrow use cases. So replacing an entire admin assistant may never be ready, but the use case of scheduling was ready 5 years ago, is more than ready today. And yet most organizations ignore that, because we get hooked on technology and platforms and software companies and sales pitches. And that is part of the problem. So that's what led me to create what I call the equivalent of Google X. You guys are familiar with Google X, which is the organization at Google, now Alphabet, that has come out with driverless cars and the balloon internet and many of the other things. And that organization basically doesn't deal with 10% improvement. It only deals with 10x, 10 times. And it deals with only big problems. In my case at Procter & Gamble, I was interested in only problems that were 10x disruptive, meaning 10 times disruptive, and then were at least $50 million each, right? And what you see up there on the screen, each of those pictures is a project, is a disruption that was, again, at least $50 million each. And we kind of got into things like, why should processes like travel expense reporting even exist in a data economy, right? By the way, there are many companies that just have eliminated the whole process and just use data from credit card companies to regenerate or self-create travel expenses. Why should the world continue to do, MRP2, which is the enterprise planning systems where you use SAP and stuff like that, in today's world, knowing that procedure is about 60 years old, when you could essentially do that same planning between supplier and customer in real time using a totally different technology. And we demonstrated that successfully. How would you use artificial intelligence for procurement and negotiation? Could you entirely get rid of invoicing as a process using blockchain? And many others. And this has been extremely successful in changing the way internal processes, business operations can be done in the world. And so I wanted to kind of share with you my personal journey and example, because I believe that this is not just pie in the sky. It is absolutely possible. You have to approach this with discipline. This is really where I came up with the 5-stage model. When you ask people what their definition of digital transformation is, you get a variety, and it is part of our job to help them understand, no, what you're talking about is mostly stage 1 transformation, which is foundation, which is automation. It is really not stage 5 transformation. Stage 5 transformation, as I call it, is living DNA. It is, how do you create the Netflix type of company that disrupts itself at least 3 times, maybe 4 times within a period of 20 years, from mail and DVDs to streaming content to original media to now international business models. You have to go from stage 1 foundation, which is really where most of the world thinks it is, digital transformation, because just because you use a new technology or you upgrade to the next version of SAP, in reality, you're just building a digital foundation. You're actually not transforming. You're not rewiring your organization. You're not rewiring your business models. That moves on to stage 2, which is siloed, where you start to see this movement in bits and pieces in the company. Stage 3, where you actually start to get a corporate mandate, just like General Electric did about 10 years ago. But the efforts are still partially synchronized. Then you kind of go to stage 4, which is all of the work is done. You have successfully transformed yourself, except for one issue. You've done a one-time transformation, and that's not sufficient because you're missing the organization DNA that makes you a perpetual transformation engine, a la Netflix. So that is discipline that can be learned, that can essentially be checklisted and demonstrated. And I don't have the time to kind of get into it, but happy to connect offline and talk about it at a later time, because I want to focus on the key message for you. Look, COVID-19 is terrible, but it has not postponed the digital future. It has actually accelerated it. And people such as yourself, one of the reasons I loved working in Africa is because of the passion, the energy. Anything is possible. Now, of course, many things are not easy, but again, don't get me wrong, anything is possible. Because in today's world, if you can have, certain parts of admin assistance work be done by robots, if you can have, entire planning processes be done in real time in a company, if you can have, and this is my favorite example, stand-up comedy be done by robots. And I'm not joking about this. This is a real life example on the screen of Lolbot, which is an AI robot that's been demonstrated in Australia, that's been programmed with tons and tons of examples from comedians, and then is now available and ready to essentially take questions and do stand-up comedy. In this particular example in Melbourne, this robot was asked, hey, tell us a joke about climate change. And the robot's response was, hey, look, the climate change is going to be a terrible thing for you guys because I have been programmed to operate in temperatures in excess of 90 degrees Celsius. But, you guys are, I wouldn't say the 4-letter word, but, you get the idea. So that's it. This is the future. This is the possibility. There is a roadmap. There is a process. There is a discipline. And of course, you live in the most exciting place on earth. So my hope for you is seize the moment, take charge, become the change that you can be. And I wish you all the best in that particular journey.